Danny, thank you for coming to Ahmad Tea. We've had a wonderful partnership, and it's really a pleasure to have you here to find out more about our partnership and also Oxfam's plans for the future.
Great. No, thank you for having me, Zahra. It's great to be here, partly because I like tea, but also because of how important this partnership between our two organisations has been for us. Oxfam turns 80 this year, and in some ways, the world needs organisations like us more than ever. There are more people in need of humanitarian assistance today than at any point since the Second World War. And so that for us, there's a huge responsibility for those of us who are fortunate enough to have income and resources and wealth to be able to reduce poverty, to end poverty, because we can. And in terms of our other priorities, I suspect we have a lot of alignment. A lot is to do with sustainability. The world needs dramatic, urgent action on climate change. And on equity, we need all actors in societies, whether they're big businesses or NGOs like us, to take things like gender equality much more seriously, to make sure that we're lifting up people at the bottom, make sure that we're paying a living wage and empowering everyone in society. And so our priorities in some ways are probably very similar to what they were in 1942, which is take action to reduce humanitarian need while also making life better for all of us on this planet and more sustainable.
Yes, absolutely. And so what are Oxfam's priorities really for this year?
So this year I think it's about really addressing the growing humanitarian need. We're doing a lot of work on vaccine access. It's a tragedy that we have the technology to produce COVID vaccines, and in the middle of a global pandemic, when the big pharmaceutical companies and governments had promised that they would make these vaccines accessible, far too few have actually reached the poorest parts of the planet. Here we are in the United Kingdom, where we've had more third doses of COVID vaccines here in this country than the entire number of first doses in the lowest income countries. And so a priority for us is to convince governments, to convince big pharmaceutical companies that they should share the intellectual property, the recipes for the vaccines, share the technologies, share the capacity, so that we can really put an end to this pandemic. And then, of course, the other big priorities around climate change, to make sure that we play our part in driving positive action to end the climate emergency. I'd like to know a bit more about how you see this partnership. Why did you want to work with an organisation like Oxfam?
We were brought to the attention of a country called Niger through a news report. And it's, as you know, it's a country in desperate need of water security. We don't source or sell our tea in Niger. We don't have a direct connection with Niger. But when we saw this news report and we recognized that this country is one of the poorest in the world, lowest GDP in the world, yet it's the highest on the climate risk index. And that juxtaposition is devastating for the people in Niger, especially rural communities that don't have access to water. And after seeing that perilous situation, we just knew we had to do something. And of course, we're a tea company, and what's tea without water?
And what aspect of our work together, of the project, for example, in Niger that we're working together on, what have you learnt, or what takeaways or lessons have you drawn from that?
Well, Oxfam had been working in Niger for, I think, a decade before we approached Oxfam. And they've been working in the rural communities and really trying to identify their critical needs. So one thing that Oxfam was bringing to the table was long-term impact. It's a sustainable solution to the problem. The problem being that in Niger they have flash floods, and yet they also have droughts. And people are stuck in this cycle. And, it was just really unfair. And Oxfam have this amazing research project which showed that there were renewable water sources in the basin of the ground. And all it needed was a water installation project and community management based on community needs, and really working out how to roll out that water and to sustain that water so that then they're out of those cycles. And that's really what Oxfam was able to offer us as an investor in this project.
Has there been something you've been most proud of from this project?
Well, we are directly giving water to 50,000 people, and indirectly it's into the hundreds of thousands. And as I mentioned, this is a community-based project. So there is huge domino effects that happen with this. There's the gender empowerment, because women are now in charge of their water supplies. They're able to market food. And when they do market food, they're able to use that money to send their children to school. So we're just seeing across society great changes, which really was possible because Oxfam had that insight and was able to help us understand sustainability. We're also working with the University of Niamey to train up postgraduate students, and we have 2 students who are doing an MSc in water management, and they will be working on the projects in the long term so that knowledge is not lost and can be passed to generations.
Well, no, look, thank you. I'm really glad you've framed it that way, because I think that has been a part of Oxfam's approach and a lesson we've learned for all of these 80 years, which is, there is immediate need. Water shortage, as you say, is a real and acute problem in places like Niger. But the answer isn't just technical. It's got to be about society and that domino effect that you're talking about.
Can I ask you about your proudest moment in your career?
Wow. Well, I don't think I have a moment. I have lots of moments. And in some ways it's because I've only ever worked in charities, and I feel in some ways I'm really lucky because I can work knowing that almost everything I'm involved in has something, some positive impact around the world. So the bits, although these days I'm a manager and I spend a lot of my time in meetings and dealing with bureaucracy and all sorts of other things that help the institution going. But the bits I'm really proud about is knowing that I've done my bit, often behind the scenes, to empower a colleague to be able to go and deliver a real lasting change around the world. And that's what drives me, and it's those little moments where I can take a bit of pride in what others are doing around the world. And that's one of the reasons I love working for Oxfam. We work in more than 80 countries around the world, in some of the most difficult places to operate in. And there are hundreds, thousands of colleagues and tens of thousands of volunteers who make change happen. And I can't take credit for much of that, but I take a little bit of pride in my role in facilitating and empowering them to do that.
Amazing. And can I ask you more about this Oxfam's vision in investing in fragile contexts? How do you feel that that really goes to solving the problem?
So our experience tells us, and you've talked a bit about it in the Niger context, that these places that we work in need not be fragile. And we can do something about that. And so our approach is very much, and has always been, about addressing immediate need. In many parts of the world, we're installing water wells, or running a new water pipeline, or we're providing cash in refugee camps where people don't have a source of income. So a core part of our approach, our foundation, I suppose, is taking action to meet needs that people have. But we also know it's got to be a lot more than that, and it's got to be about making sure that people have the skills needed to get jobs. So a lot of our work is around creating employment opportunities or creating training programs to skill people up. We also know that there's a role in addressing social change. You talked about the domino effect on gender, for example. In many parts of the world, a lot of our programs put gender equality at the heart of them, so that when we are delivering cash programs or building a water well, we're also thinking about how do we make sure that we empower women and girls in that community? How do we make sure that we challenge some of those norms that keep women often in a position of subservience.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that in our project in Niger, the collaboration, Oxfam's vision at really looking at how we can support women. And I think the Zinda project, which is an extension of the Decade project that we've invested in, is actually the first time in Niger history that women are owning the land and then managing the water on that land. So it's just a great achievement to be part of that.
So I've talked about Oxfam's 80th anniversary, but Ahmad Tea's just turned 35, and what an amazing story, from a little tea shop in Southampton to a global business. What does the next 35 years hold for a company like yours?
Specifically in Niger, in 35 years, we would love to see our seed funding rolled out nationally and become part of the National Water Plan. I know that Niger is still looking for funding and international funders to help with that. And I hope that what Ahmad Tea has achieved to show that investing in fragile contexts through Oxfam's leadership, that it does bring that return and it does bring stability in the long term. And we really have to fight for the right to water for everyone. And I would just hope that in 35 years' time, Niger have secured the right of water for everyone in their country.
That's fantastic, and I really wish you the best, because we live in such a globalized economy where we're fortunate enough to enjoy the world's best teas here in Hampshire, or have wonderful coffee or chocolate, but we haven't paid enough attention to those supply chains, and we can all make a difference, can't we? From the tea we drink, or all of our decisions as consumers. So I really wish you well.
And Danny, we would all like to know, what is your favourite cup of tea?
Well, I was born in Sri Lanka, so it's got to be Ceylon tea, something that's sort of dark and strong, and I don't drink it with as much sugar as I used to, but I still like my tea strong.
And I would just like to thank you for coming and answering our questions and opening up about what Oxfam plans to do for the future. And also thank you so much for the project that you're doing with us, because really we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we wanted, which is long-term sustainable outcomes for generations across Niger. So thank you so much for that leadership, and thank you for your support throughout the world.